Today, we're going to unpack one of the most pivotal moments in modern history. We're talking about two gunshots, just two shots, that lit a fuse and ended up plunging an entire continent into a war that would completely redraw the map of the world. This is the story of how one assassination kicked off World War I.
So right off the bat, here's the big question, the one that's so hard to wrap your head around. How on earth could the murder of one man and his wife lead to a global conflict that resulted in 30 million casualties? I mean, the scale just doesn't seem to match up, right? Well, today, we're going to connect those dots. So let's go back. Picture this. It's a sunny summer day, June 28, 1914. We're in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which at the time was a province inside the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire. This city is about to become infamous.
It's around 11 in the morning. Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie earn in the city, touring an open-top car. And then a 19-year-old student, a young man named Gavrilo Princip, steps out of the crowd. He raises a pistol and fires two shots from just feet away. Both the Archduke and the Duchess are hit. They'll be dead within minutes. That right there, that's the spark.
Now, you might be thinking this was some perfectly planned, flawlessly executed plot. But you'd be wrong. The truth is, this whole thing was a chaotic mess. It only succeeded because of an unbelievable string of blunders, terrible decisions, and just astoundingly bad luck.
Let's start with the security, or maybe the complete lack of it. Think about it. The heir to the throne is in a 4-mile-long motorcade, and they assign only 120 local policemen. No soldiers, nothing. This quote from a police official says it all. Their security plan was basically to hope for the best. They were literally leaving it all up to fate. And you know what? Fate almost saved them. Earlier that morning, another one of the assassins actually threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but the driver sees it coming, hits the gas, and the bomb just bounces off the back and rolls under the next car in the motorcade. It explodes, injuring about 20 people, but the Archduke and Sophie are completely fine. Now, this should have been it, right? Tour over. Get him out of there. But nope.
After that first attempt, the motorcade speeds off to the town hall. And Franz Ferdinand is, understandably, furious. He actually cuts off the mayor's speech to say this: "I came here on a visit, and I am greeted with bombs." You can just feel the anger and the tension. But even after all that, they decided to continue with the day's events. A truly fatal decision.
And this is where that cascade of errors just becomes unbelievable. First, the Archduke, in a noble gesture, insists they change the route so he can visit an officer who was injured in the bombing. Okay, mistake number 2, nobody clearly tells the drivers about this change of plans. So it happens, the lead driver follows the original route and makes a wrong turn down a side street. And then, for the fatal finale, as the Archduke's driver tries to back the car up, the engine stalls. They are a sitting duck. And by the most staggering, unbelievable coincidence, who happens to be standing on that exact street corner, having basically given up for the day? Gavrilo Princip. He couldn't believe his luck. He just steps up to the stalled car and fires. As his wife Sophie collapses, the Archduke's last words are a plea for her to live for their children just before he dies himself. Okay, so it's a tragic story, a series of coincidences and bad luck. But still, why did this lead to a world war? Well, to get that, we have to zoom out from the streets of Sarajevo and look at the bigger picture of Europe in 1914. Because the entire continent was basically a political tinderbox just waiting for a match.
You see, Gavrilo Princip wasn't just some lone, angry student. He was recruited, trained, and armed by a secret society called the Black Hand. And their whole goal was Serbian nationalism. They wanted to create a greater Serbia, or a Yugoslavia, a unified state for all Slavic peoples. The problem was, a lot of those people lived inside the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Black Hand was perfectly willing to use violence to get what they wanted.
Now here's the really tragic irony of the whole thing. Franz Ferdinand wasn't some hardliner. He was actually seen as a moderate who wanted to give the Slavic people more rights and more power within the empire. But for the Black Hand, that made him an even bigger threat. They were afraid that if his reforms actually worked, the Slavic people would be happy to stay in the empire, and their dream of a separate, unified state would be dead forever.
On top of all this nationalist tension, Europe was divided into two armed camps. It was this tangled mess of military alliances. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, that's Great Britain, France, and Russia. And on the other, the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. These treaties were supposed to keep the peace, but what they really created was a tripwire. A fight between any two of them could pull everybody else into the war.
And the general mood? Well, the atmosphere across Europe was thick with tension. You had Britain and Germany in this huge, expensive arms race to build the biggest navy. All the big powers were fighting over colonies around the globe. And maybe the most dangerous part? A lot of leaders had just accepted that a massive European war was going to happen sooner or later. There was this feeling that it was inevitable.
So that's the world the news from Sarajevo landed in. The assassination set off what's now called the July Crisis. It was basically a month-long diplomatic train wreck where every single decision just made things worse and worse. Austria-Hungary saw its chance to finally crush Serbian nationalism, so it sent Serbia an ultimatum, a list of 10 demands that were so harsh they were basically impossible to accept. I mean, look at this. They demanded Serbia let Austrian officials come into their country and run the investigation. That's a complete violation of sovereignty. This thing was designed to be rejected. It was an excuse to go to war.
Now, Austria-Hungary would never have been this aggressive on its own. They had the full backing of their powerful ally, Germany. The German Kaiser gave them what historians call the blank check, basically saying, hey, whatever you decide to do to Serbia, we've got your back no matter what. This was huge. It's what turned a local fight into a major European crisis. And after that, the dominoes just fell, one after another, with incredible speed. July 28th, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. So Russia, Serbia's ally, starts mobilizing its giant army. Germany sees that as a threat, so it declares war on Russia, then on France, which was Russia's ally. And finally, when Germany invades neutral Belgium to get to France, Britain declares war on Germany. And just like that, in a little over a week, the whole continent was at war. So what's the big takeaway here? How do we make sense of this insane spiral from one crisis in one city into a global catastrophe? Let's break it down. First, let's just sit with this number for a second. 30 million. That's the estimated number of people, soldiers and civilians, who were killed or wounded. A level of death and destruction the world had never imagined. All spiraling out from those 2 shots fired in Sarajevo. You have to understand that for the first 2 countries involved, the stakes felt enormous. Austria-Hungary was this fragile, multi-ethnic empire, and its leaders believed if they looked weak and didn't punish Serbia, the whole thing would just fall apart. And for Serbia, giving in to that ultimatum meant becoming a puppet of Austria. So both sides felt they were backed into a corner and had no other choice. So in the end, it was really 3 things that turned this local conflict into a world war. First, that rigid alliance system that dragged everyone in automatically. Second, the intense, aggressive nationalism that made everyone suspicious and ambitious. And third, a widespread belief among leaders that war was just another tool you could use, a valid option. When you have all those things in play, there's just no oxygen left in the room for diplomacy to work. And all of this leaves us with a pretty sobering thought, one that's still relevant today. The whole July crisis was driven by leaders who felt their nation's honor, its credibility, was at stake. So the question we have to ask is, when nations feel like their prestige is on the line, is diplomacy always doomed to fail?